If you've ever looked up at a clear, cloudless night sky, you might have been struck with wonder at the sheer number of stars up there. According to astronomers, the Milky Way contains around 100 to 400 billion stars, and that is just one galaxy. The universe contains around 100 to 200 billion galaxies, and that's just a guess. Some estimates go as high as 2 trillion. The point is, there's a lot of stars giving off a lot of light, so why is it dark at night? The answer to this seems pretty obvious. The Earth has finished a rotation, the Sun is on the other side of the planet, and the stars are pretty and bright, but they're too far away to be nearly as bright as the Sun. However, this is the cosmos we're talking about, of course. So the answer is a little bit more complicated than that. Just before we continue with the episode today, big thank you to our sponsor, Incogni. They are the service that helps you vanish from the internet legally. I mean, in the ways you want. If I use them to vanish from the internet, I'm not going to have a career. So it takes the data away from the places you don't want it to be. Look, if you've ever searched your name and found your address, your email, or your family listed on some shady site somewhere, that ain't an accident. That is data brokers selling your info without your consent, and your data should be yours, shouldn't it? Incogni automates the process of finding and removing your personal data from those sites. Hundreds of them. And now, with their unlimited plan, you can even send them any link where your data appears, and they will take care of it, even if it's outside that default database, which is also massive, by the way. It's basically privacy on autopilot. You just plug in your details, you authorize them once, and then you let their team track, remove, and follow up on everything. So take your personal data back with Incogni. Use the code Celestium at incogni.com/Celestium and you'll get 60% off an annual plan, which is nice. That's incogni.com/Celestium, promo code Celestium. And now back to today's episode. Olbers paradox. Why should the night sky be bright? Now, if you're one of those people who study the night sky, pondering profound questions like, why is it dark? You're not the first. This is a question that has puzzled some of the greatest thinkers for hundreds of years. Writing in the early 1600s, Johannes Kepler, considered to be the father of modern astronomy thanks to his groundbreaking work in the field, posited that in an infinite universe uniformly filled with stars and galaxies, the night sky should be really bright, not dark. Kepler wasn't even the first to ponder this puzzle. The question could be traced back to a 6th century merchant and geographer from Alexandria, and people were probably asking this even longer still. However, it was German astronomer Heinrich Wilhelm Matthias Olbers from 1758 to 1840 who first put feather quill to paper to formulate what we know today as Olbers paradox. In an infinite universe, the entire sky should be as bright as the surface of a star in all directions. However, that's not the case. And that's why we have the paradox. Today we know a bit more about the universe, but at the time of Kepler and Olbers, astronomers and philosophers believed that the universe was infinite in both space and time, and the Milky Way was the entire galaxy. It had no beginning, and there was no end in sight. The universe was also completely static and unchanging. It just was. Similarly, while there were some patterns to the phases of the moon and movements in the night sky in general, the stars, much like the rest of the universe, had always just been there. No beginning, no end. Like the universe, they just were. However, if you believe in an infinite universe, you're gonna start running into problems. Imagine a bubble around the Earth. Within this immediate bubble, there will be a finite number of stars. However, if you double the size of the bubble, so you now have a bubble twice the size of your original bubble, you'll have 8 times the volume of your original bubble, which means that you have 8 times the number of stars. That's a lot of stars. In an infinite universe, this bubble just keeps on growing. It just never stops, meaning you have an infinite number of stars. No matter where you look in the night sky or how small the area is that you're studying, your line of sight should eventually hit a star. An easier way to picture this is standing in a dense forest surrounded by trees. Some trees might be closer to you, while other trees are further away, and there may be space between the individual trees. But everywhere you look, at least one tree falls within your line of sight. If you also consider the universe is infinite in time, it means that the light from even the most distant star has already reached Earth. Put simply, everywhere you look is a star, and they're all as bright as the sun, so the night sky, instead of dark, should be as bright as the sun or a star in all directions. But clearly, that's not what's happening. Today we know a bit more about the universe than Olbers and Kepler did, but this is still a good question. We take a dark night sky for granted. Once the sun sets, it's dark. It's obvious. But Olbers and Kepler had a pretty good point. With more stars and galaxies in the night sky than we can ever hope to count, all of them shining as bright or even brighter than our sun, the night sky shouldn't be dark. Solving the paradox. Now, once a paradox is formulated, it is just a matter of time before someone is going to try and solve it, because there's nothing humanity dislikes more than unanswered questions, and many of these possible solutions seem very plausible. One theory states that space isn't empty. There are a whole lot of nebulas, gas, and dust clouds between us and the stars, blocking the light of the more distant stars, which keeps the night sky nice and dark. This is true. However, these clouds of dust and gas absorb the radiation from the stars and eventually heat up, so the clouds themselves start to glow, lighting up the night sky. Additionally, there simply isn't enough dust floating around the universe to explain this paradox. Another theory posited that the distribution of stars just isn't uniform. In other words, the stars aren't neatly stacked in a repeated pattern. Instead, some stars are stacked behind other stars, meaning that even if there were an infinite number of stars, some of them would be hidden from view, which might explain why some spots of the night sky are dark. However, modern astronomical findings suggest that the universe is essentially isotropic. That's uniformly the same in all directions, so that's not the answer either. One of the most plausible theories is actually very simple. The sun is very bright because it is close to the Earth. However, in an infinite universe filled with infinite stars, the more distant a star is, the fainter it will be. This is partially correct. The distance of the stars is certainly a factor. However, let's consider that bubble around the Earth again. The bigger your bubble gets, the further away the stars are from the Earth. The distant stars wouldn't be as bright as closer stars, but since there are exponentially more stars, the light from the combined number of stars should be as bright as a single star closer to Earth. Remember, at this point, it was still believed that the universe was infinite in space and time, meaning the light from even the most distant star would have reached the planet. Ironically, the first person to provide some kind of scientifically correct answer to solve Olbers' paradox wasn't an astronomer or a scientist, but rather a poet. Edgar Allan Poe apparently had more than ravens and telltale hearts on his mind, because in 1848, Poe wrote an essay titled Eureka, a prose poem, where he made an interesting proposal. The universe was not in fact infinite. Pondering the universe, Poe came to the conclusion that the universe, like everything else, had a starting point, and since the speed of light is finite, as determined by Danish astronomer Olbers back in 1676, some spots in the night sky are dark because the light from those distant stars just hasn't reached us yet. Poe wasn't a mathematician, he was just a writer and a poet, staring out into the void of space, but as it turns out, he was right. However, the scientific community would have to wait almost 80 years for the science to catch up to this poet. Finally, in the 1920s, two astronomical theories were presented independently that changed our perception of the universe and finally solved Olbers' paradox. The first theory, presented by astronomer Georges Lemaitre in 1927, was a bit controversial. The origins of the universe had been debated for a very long time, but it was Lemaitre who proposed that the whole universe was in a hot, dense state, and nearly 14 billion years ago, life as we know it started with a really big bang. As Poe suggested in 1848, the universe was not in fact infinite in time. Like everything else, the universe had a start button, and through complicated mathematics, astronomers and scientists have concluded that the button was pressed 13.7 billion years ago. That may sound like our universe has been around for a really long time, but in astronomical terms, our universe is actually pretty young. This is a very simplified explanation of how the universe got started, and we have no idea what was going on before the Big Bang occurred, but for the purposes of explaining the Olbers paradox, all we need is a starting point. Of course, the stars didn't just appear at the moment of the Big Bang. According to CERN, the first stars only formed from gas clouds around 150 to 200 million years after the Big Bang, but the universe and the stars as we know it is roughly 13.7 billion years old. As we know, the speed of light is incredibly fast, but it is finite. When you flip a light switch, it seems almost instantaneous, but it actually takes the light from the sun around 8 minutes to reach us, so should some supervillain ever manage to steal the sun, it will take around 8 minutes for us to realize. It takes 4 years for light from Proxima Centauri, our nearest star, after the sun to reach us. This means that if a star is far enough away from Earth that its light would take longer than 13.7 billion years to reach us, that spot in the night sky will be dark because the light simply hasn't reached us yet. The second observation was made in 1929 by American astronomer Edwin Hubble, who discovered that the universe wasn't static. It was, and still is, expanding rapidly. This means that the distant galaxies are, in fact, moving even further away from us faster than the speed of light. When a light source like a star moves away from the observer, the wavelength of the light changes, moving towards the red part of the electromagnetic spectrum, this effect being known as redshifting. The human eye is an amazing and complex optic machine, but it has limitations. Human beings can't see infrared light. In practice, this means that even if the light from those distant receding stars and galaxies actually reaches us, it's because the light has now redshifted into a spectrum the human eye can't detect. We simply won't be able to see it. Instead, we just see dark spots in the night sky. Of course, all of this raises another question. The night sky is dark at the moment, but is it going to become brighter, perhaps even as bright as the surface of a star in all directions, as more and more of the light reaches us? If the universe was static, that might happen. However, the universe is expanding, so the light from those distant stars and galaxies is redshifting out of our range of vision. On top of that, much like the universe, stars are not infinite in time. The estimated lifespan of our sun is between 9 and 10 billion years. The mass of a star determines its lifespan, so while some stars will be around longer than our sun, eventually all the stars will burn out and go dark. According to NASA, the Milky Way forms about one new star a year, which might sound like a lot, but actually the rate of star formation has been steadily declining for the last couple of billion years. Instead of becoming brighter, our night sky will steadily grow darker. So for hundreds of years, astronomers and scientists were looking at the night sky, trying to understand why the night sky is so dark despite all those trillions of stars shining so brightly. It may seem like a trivial question, with an obvious answer, but the implication of a dark night sky changed our fundamental understanding of the universe. Instead of a static, infinite universe with no beginning and no end, we now know that we're living in a rapidly expanding universe with a clear beginning and a possible end. As it turns out, nothing, not even in the vast expanse of the universe, is going to last forever. Thank you for watching.